Greetings and salutations, gamers. My name is Kyle, also known as GamersWeekend, and welcome back to the Dark Souls Challenge. Last time, we had our very first adventure into Dark Souls 2 by completing the game with only miracles, and it was the most fun I've had since I started making these challenge videos. But today, we're heading back to our good old friend Dark Souls Remastered to go after by far the most requested challenge suggestion I've ever gotten. Can you beat Dark Souls with only consumables? Short answer, yes. But it's a yes with a little footnote that reads, pertaining to the base game, the answer is by all means yes, and far easier than you'd expect. However, the all bosses iteration begins a complication of entirely unprecedented magnitude, even though the base game bosses are almost all easier than most challenges attempted previously. The DLC bosses beyond the opening of boss of Sanctuary Guardian, who shares common weaknesses with base game bosses and a health pool that sits even below Quelaag's, are on a completely different tier that creates a level of difficulty that surpasses rolling into things hundreds of times with the Armor of Thorns on New Game Plus. Despite all odds though, fights that can take upwards of an hour or longer that utilize most of the usual 396 even consumables will eventually with very near perfect execution lead to victory over the final bosses, answering both the regular and all bosses question with a resounding yes. Nailed it! Did you get all that? Well then, long answer it is, but first let's go over the rules. For this challenge, damage must be done with consumable items. Any kind of magic or weapons are not allowed to deal damage whatsoever. Any other equipment is fair game though, including armor, rings, and shields. The run begins at the beginning of the game and ends upon defeating Gwyn. As always, we will be attempting at least every single boss in the game, and no major glitches or sequence breaks are allowed. And one last thing before we begin, if you've been enjoying these Dark Souls challenges and look forward to future videos and streams, then it would mean the world to me if you would quickly take a few seconds to press that subscribe button. That covers just about everything. I hope you are all having a lovely day, and without further ado, this is the Dark Souls Remastered Consumables Only Challenge. We start out by taking the black fire bombs as our gift, so we can actually play the video game, and name our character Brady after the sports ball person. I think he plays basketball or something. Since we've started off with black fire bombs, we can kill the Asylum Demon on our first encounter with 5 of our starting bombs. This is usually a strat that people use in speedruns or to get the Great Hammer, but we aren't allowed to use the hammer, and this most definitely won't be a very speedy run. Bird time, fire shrine, and pick up some extra bombs before heading to the Undead Bird. The Undead Merchant here will be one of the 3 main merchants for our run, selling both regular firebombs and throwing knives. Throwing knives this early on won't be very useful, but firebombs are going to be our main source of damage until we can unlock Sen's Fortress. We can pick up a few extra black firebombs in a chest before the tower, get wombo comboed into the next dimension by this extra angry group of hollows, and head into Taurus Demon's Arena. If you've never used firebombs this early, then it may be surprising to hear that early on, these things deal quite a lot of damage. 11 firebombs later, and Taurus Demon goes down. Similar to the archery only challenge, this run has a very high requirement for souls. Every fight is going to require that we constantly stock up on consumables, and those certainly aren't free. On the other hand, consumables in Dark Souls 1 don't actually scale with any stat, so we aren't in desperate need of levels. However, we will be spending any excess souls into both endurance and vitality to increase our health and ability to wear heavy armor while maintaining light feet. Let's try to solve this soul dilemma early. We spend all of our Taurus Demon souls on stocking up the full firebombs and make our way through the Undead Parish. After unlocking a shortcut back to Firelink and restocking on throwing knives, we quickly head into the catacombs to take on Pinwheel. The strategy here is fairly simple: throwing knives to dispel the clones and firebombs to take out the boss. Mr. Masks goes down. Afterwards, we make a quick trip into the Tomb of the Giants to grab the covetous Silver Serpent's Ring, which will boost our soul income by 20%, when we remember to actually put it on. Gargoyles are next up on the list. Firebombs are once again great damage against these guys, and after getting somewhat sweaty while the second gargoyle comes out, we get through in one piece. First bell down. We start to fight Lortrek, but he already knows where this is going and he misses his tragic love gravity, so he decides to finish the job for us. Thank you, Lortrek. Also, nice ring. Moonlight Butterfly is next up on the agenda, and thankfully she has some low resistance to fire. At some angles it can be somewhat tricky to hit her, but we take her out with little difficulty all the same. I make a quick detour to grab the Wolf Ring, which may help us in the future, the Grass Crest Shield, and head into Havel's room. I wanted to get his ring, but was surprised mid-battle with this. Gee, if only I could use weapons right now. Thank you, Dark Souls, you grade A pain in my— With Havel's ring in hand, we can upgrade our armor setup to include the Elite Knight set. More armor, more poise, yeah, we're feeling good. Into the lower burg, and it's Capra Demon time. There's supposed to be some kind of specific angle that you can use a bow's reticle to aim firebombs over his door. But personally, I found going for a free-handed Hail Mary to be a bit easier. We managed to get most of the Capra Demon's health as well as one of the dogs before even entering. From there, this fight was an absolute cakewalk. Another boss down. Just after the Capra Demon, we find the second of our essential merchants, the Moss Hag. Not only does she sell another type of throwing knife, the poison throwing knife, but she'll also sell us the true savior of this run, dung pies. These things inflict toxic to the player when thrown, but in return inflict toxic buildup against enemies. These things will make our life a lot easier, but we'll come back to that in a bit. In the depths, we quickly take out the channeler and start fighting the gaping dragon. Despite being a dragon, he still takes quite a bit of damage from our firebombs. That's the sewage salamander down. A quick trip to the asylum and it's time to take out the stray demon. It only takes 3 dung pies to inflict toxic on the demon, and while it slowly drains his health, we speed up the process with our extra firebombs. After collecting the painted doll, I think it's finally time we address the flaming spider lady in the room, Quelaag. She has an absolutely absurd amount of health, even more than the Iron Golem, and is completely immune to fire. Throwing knives alone are not nearly enough damage to actually take her out, and she's completely immune to poison damage. So how exactly are we supposed to win? Turns out, while she's immune to poison, she's not immune to toxic. And even though she has absurd resistances, it's still possible to build up enough toxic with dung pies to get it going. Thankfully, we also have blooming purple moss from the moss merchant to cure ourselves, while the toxic slowly takes down Quelaag, and we can speed up the withering process with our throwing knives. It's a bit of the bump in the road, but nevertheless, Quelaag falls. One ceaseless discharge ceaselessly with a few throwing knives later, and we can finally head to the bounce house where we find our last essential merchant, the crestfallen scam artist. He's gonna sell us our 4th and final type of direct damage consumable, the black firebombs. These will be the most essential as they're just like vanilla firebombs, but just like real life, the chocolate version is always superior. Yes, I realize I'm drawing an analogy between ice cream flavors and an incendiary device, but I think that says more about chocolate than it does the challenge runs we're currently doing. What were we talking about again? Right, Dark Souls. It took me a while to realize that the Iron Golem is unaffected by dung pies, and after a few failed falls, we sent him sprawling off into the void. The Rafters and Archers gave us very little trouble, and next up are the Anor Londo Globetrotters. And since I have the worst time pronouncing their names, I decided to run their titles into Google Translate about 20 or so times, and ended up with Delete Agenda and, wait a moment, heartwarming. Either way, Delete Agenda is very fast and isn't the easiest target to nail with firebombs, especially while Wait a Moment is constantly on our back. However, with enough patience, we can slowly take down Delete Agenda's health bar and move on to phase 2. Super Wait a Moment is vulnerable to toxic. Super Wait a Moment is vulnerable to toxic, so after using a few dung pies to drain his health bar, we start to chip away with black firebombs. It's a fairly longer than average fight, but Delete Agenda and Wait a Moment go down. After taking out Guinevere for the Lord Vessel and Dark Londo, we torch the Dark Moon Firekeeper for her soul, which immediately gets shoved into our sippy cup, and take on the Dark Moon Waifu. I misjudged how long I had before having to take cover, and that ended up costing me the second death of the run. Second try went a lot smoother though, and we make it through without much issue. I suppose I can let Andre live this time and buy the crest of Artorias off him so we can take on the Danger Doggo. Our firebomb damage is starting to look a little dire, but it's still serviceable enough for now. Thankfully, Sif gave us great RNG for this fight, and we made it through a good portion of the fight just getting to constantly spam firebombs. She goes down after a surprisingly easy fight, but it's gonna be a minute before we use the ring she gives us. I'd like to be a bit stronger before attempting the Kings. Next we head to the Duke's Archives, where Seath sentences us to the Tentacle Dungeon, complete with snakes and the worst lo-fi I've ever heard, and make our way to the Crystal Caves. Seath himself is weak to fire, so you can probably see where this is going. The fight isn't much different from a regular fight, other than the fact that he insisted on spamming his melee attacks for some reason. Into the painted world where it's time to... Priscilla is a little tricky to track with firebombs while she's invisible, but after the veil breaks, she's not much of a threat. Feels more like a waste of firebombs more than anything. Next up is a return trip to the Bone Zone to clean up the Ravelord. His backup dancers are far more threatening than he is, but thankfully he kills them repeatedly. A decent chunk of firebombs later, and the Ravelord goes down. At this point, our endurance is high enough to let us fast roll with half of the stone armor set on. So in the armor department, we're feeling pretty good. Down to the spooky town where we can use a bow's aim function to help us aim some firebombs at Ingward and take him out for the key, skipping the need to ever go into the ghost house. Afterwards, I give 4 Kings a try and things aren't looking super amazing. The damage is fairly low even with black firebombs, and putting that against a DPS race isn't the best of ideas. This is going to be tricky, but not impossible. Let's come back to this. That means the Izalith boss gauntlet is going to be our next destination. Demon Fire Sage is also susceptible to Toxic just like his Asylum cousin, but his moveset is slightly more annoying. That being said, he doesn't give us too much trouble. Next up to bat is the Centipede Demon, which is our 3rd boss immune to fire, if of course you're including Ceaseless Discharge. Thankfully, he shares the ability to be toxic with the rest of his Izalith gang, so while this fight isn't necessarily difficult, it's still mostly a waiting game sped up by throwing knives. It's not long before the Centipede falls. And now for my biggest failure as a speedrunner, the Bed of Chaos. There's a speedrunning strat called the Toki Bombs, where you can throw firebombs from the center to break both orbs very rapidly and head directly to the core. I am very bad at this strat, and after failing it once, reverted back to my old bow method with firebombs to break the second orb and kill her beetle the slightly more traditional way. That's Lord Soul number 3 in our pocket. Before heading back to the 4 Kings, I quickly put together a shopping list of Firekeeper souls to run around and collect. After stockpiling them up, I spend them at Firelink for an Estus +6. The 4 Kings are still a bit tricky, but by maximizing our magic resistance and decreasing the amount of time it takes to heal with an upgraded Estus, they aren't too tricky to take care of. The final Lord goes down. And then the DLC changed everything. This run for the most part has been pretty simple with a few gimmicks here and there, but the DLC is an entirely different beast. For comparison, every boss so far has, at most, put a dent into our firebomb reserves but never fully depleted it. Most of the bosses in the DLC have massive health bars that will require near the full 396 consumables in our inventory, and there were a few people I encountered while researching this run that were convinced that the later bosses were completely impossible with our limited resources. So just exactly how difficult is this section of the game? Sanctuary Guardian will be the one boss that won't give us too much trouble. He's the only boss in the group that can be toxic and has even less health than Quelaag. Other than a somewhat tricky moveset, he shouldn't be too bad. Artorias, on the other hand, is going to be a massive spike in difficulty. He isn't going to go through our entire reserve, but with black firebombs dealing 32 damage apiece and regular firebombs dealing about 19 apiece, we have about 5,049 potential damage with all 198 firebombs. The Abyss Walker's health bar stands at about 3,750, which means we have about 1,299 damage to spare. Thankfully, we have throwing knives to help make up for a margin of that damage, but keep in mind that these DLC bosses are fast and hard to even hit in the first place. Every time we miss a consumable, we get closer and closer to running out of damage. And while the margin of error against Artorias is decent, it's a whole different ballgame with Kalameet and Manus. Kalameet boasts a health bar of 5,400 points. With none of our consumables dealing above 30 damage, this fight is going to be brutal. Damage calculations involving throwing knives can vary based on distance, but on average, if we land every consumable, then that's a total of 6,039 points. That means we have about 639 points of wiggle room, which isn't a lot at all. That's not even a quarter of our black firebomb's worth of damage. And Manus on paper looks even worse. A health bar of 6,665 points makes this guy a Goliath. Thankfully, his resistances are slightly lower than Kalameet's, which lets us have just an extra bit of damage per projectile. We're gonna need it though, as our total damage looks to be at about 6,831. That's only a 166 damage margin of error. That means if we miss 9 black firebombs, we've basically already lost. At this point, I should also mention the Dragon Headstone. This is an item obtained from the Everlasting Dragon in Ash Lake that allows you to grow a dragon head that breathes fire. This item sits in the item slot, but isn't consumed upon use. So it begs to ask the question, is it allowed in the challenge? For this challenge, I decided that while it is an item that should be allowed in the rule set, it ultimately detracts from the overall difficulty and theme of the challenge. So I decided that I would allow the use of the headstone only for farming souls, as to speed up the grinding process to restock all of our consumables between bosses, and ban it from use in boss fights. If we're killing a boss, we're doing it with these 4 consumable items. But keep in mind that consumables are very slow, and each boss only has 2 or 3 attacks that you can safely respond to with a firebomb. Otherwise, you risk missing and losing damage in what is already a very small margin of error. Patience, consistency, and precision are ultimately what's going to be required if anybody is going to beat these bosses. And I'm the one dumb enough to give it a try. First up is Sanctuary Guardian. As I said before, this boss is going to be the most simple of the 4. Simple enough that we had enough time for some mid-fight disrespect. A decent amount of his attacks are punishable, and this fight doesn't look too different from a typical Sanctuary Guardian fight. Aside from the fact that it took 11 minutes and 27 seconds. The Abyss Walker stood against us next, and to say this fight was tense is an understatement. We were just about all the way through our black firebombs, the first of our consumable stacks, when we drank our last Estus.
Do you guys believe in miracles?
We still had over an estimated 110 projectiles to go, and we're already 22 minutes in. And then I realized that Artorias could be headshot with throwing knives. Not only that, but he could be headshot mid-buff animation to stagger him out of it. It was another 30 minutes of battling without a single Estus, but after a 52-minute and 3-second fight, we defeated Artorias the Abyss Walker with consumables only on our first try.
Sit down! God, do you believe in miracles?
And before any of you ask, yeah, this guy didn't have a voice for the next 2 or 3 days. Kalameet was the next on my boss list, and this Titan was a tricky beast. He had very few attacks that I could respond to, but his side-sweeping fire attack and flying charge were the 2 most common attack I could take advantage of. Anytime he stood on his hind legs was a decent opportunity as well, but failing to respond to those attacks correctly was punishing, especially getting debuffed with Calamity. It took patience, time, a total of 350 consumables, and 2 attempts before we finally slayed the Black Dragon after 1 hour, 4 minutes, and 36 seconds. The new official longest fight in the challenge series, surpassing Armor of Thorn's only New Game Plus Manus by almost 20 minutes. The final boss in our DLC gauntlet is Manus, and this fight was a test of endurance and consistency. Not only do we have to battle Manus with only consumables, but keep in mind that we also have to deal with his magic attacks, which are deflected by the Silver Pendant, which, if you haven't noticed yet, goes in the same slot as our attacking consumables. Managing through our item bar and toggling through it correctly is something that Manus tested us on constantly. Thankfully, in Remastered, if you hold down the toggle button, it will automatically cycle to the first item on your equipment bar, making for fast switch outs. This fight was still close, but something I discovered made the error window a lot bigger. Not only can Manus be headshot with throwing knives, but mid-fight I found 3 different attacks that can consistently be responded to with a headshot throwing knife. This vastly improved our overall damage and increased the margin of error up by an extra 990 points, making this fight potentially easier than the Kalameet fight. And it turned out to be the case, but only by a slight margin. 316 consumables, 3 attempts, 58 minutes and 9 seconds later, we finish the DLC. Artorias, Kalameet, and Manus with consumables only all smashed our previous record of longest boss time. To give context on how long that took, as of recording this video, the current world record for the Dark Souls Remastered All Bosses speedrun was done in 1 hour and 53 seconds. The All Bosses speedrun of Dark Souls Remastered is faster than just the Kalameet fight alone. This seemingly simple at face value challenge is hiding some of the hardest boss fights I've ever encountered. With the DLC finished off, it's finally time we end the run. And what better victory lap than to fry the Lord of Cinder? It takes 41 parries and 41 black fire bombs to finally defeat the Lord of Cinder. And with that, we have officially defeated Dark Souls Remastered with only consumables. Oh man, I need to touch some grass. If you're curious on why I chose the fire ending, it was purely to burn this run and send it back to wherever it came from. It started out as an innocent, kind little run with a fun gimmick here and there before rapidly evolving into a disgusting monster. I will admit though, the satisfaction of beating the DLC bosses was immense, especially that first try Artorias. Overall, if you're looking for a simple challenge, then the whole base game was a fun little challenge, but only take on the DLC if you're really wanting to put yourself to the test. But it's finally time to put away the fire bombs and throwing knives and dung pies until I finally get the patience and or will to do this in one of the other 2 games. And maybe Bloodborne if I ever get around to actually playing Bloodborne for the first time. In the meantime though, for the next challenge we will be returning to Dark Souls 2 for the next magic only run, when we take on Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, with only Pyromancy. But if you would like to see me do a challenge as either a video or a live stream, then send a recommendation my way, either in the comments section below or in the suggestions channel in our Discord server. If it's difficult or interesting enough, it could become its own video like this one, get a dedicated live stream, or even both. I'm interested to see what else you guys can come up with. In the meantime though, if you guys did enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up, pop that subscribe button, and ring-a-tingling that little bell to be notified whenever I drop another video. You can also join the Discord, link is in the description as always. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you gamers on the flip side. Later!